In Geerup's video, DNA equal Do Not Abort, he tried to argue that the uniqueness of an embryo's DNA proved that it was a distinct human whose right to life superseded the rights of the woman carrying it. Why does the uniqueness of the DNA matter? Consider some situations where the uniqueness of the DNA does not matter. Who saves the DNA of their dead relatives? In theory, if you saved your mother's DNA after she died, then in the near future you might be able to clone her and create a child that would look like your mother once did. I know of no one who does stuff like that, and if any exist, they're rare. But in not doing that, we are all losing the unique DNA patterns of our loved ones forever. If nothing else, future genealogists would thank us if we made that a common practice. So, Geerup, are you keeping DNA samples of your dead relatives? I doubt it. If you're like most people, then you value the person, their words and actions, their relationship with you, not the unique DNA pattern. If someone doing genetic experiments tossed a random human genome they created into the trash, would they be guilty of murder? If you discovered that you had been cloned as an infant and that there were hundreds of people scattered about the world with your exact DNA pattern, would that diminish the value of your life for you? If it were only the distinctness of the DNA that mattered, then a tapeworm or other parasite should have the right to take up residence in your gut, because that parasite, having distinct DNA, would have the right to life. The DNA that made the tapeworm is just as distinct as the DNA of the human fetus, but no one is fighting for the rights of tapeworms to make a home in your body. Is not, in the standard religious worldview, a tapeworm a creature created by God that got inside your body because of God's will? That parasite would have as much right to life as the fetus inside a woman who was raped. No. Okay, a tapeworm isn't human, no matter how unique its DNA. We're talking about human DNA, not any DNA. All our laws are guilty of human exceptionalism, for good reason. Geerup also notes, in the sidebar to his video, that legally the moment a child leaves the womb it can be murdered by the mother and then she can be punished. He then claimed that cases used to justify abortion would not work if someone brought up arguments to justify the killing of an infant. For example, the baby was conceived through rape, the infant is deformed and mentally handicapped, the mother's health is suffering as a result of her baby. Would anyone who endorses abortion in the womb openly justify the killing of an infant using these excuses? Geerup thinks this proves that these objections are insincere and that the heart of the matter is whether the fetus is a living human. He is not correct on 2 counts. First, it is not true that no one would justify of the killing of infants or even more fully grown children on those counts. It has been justified by some cultures. Consider Deuteronomy 21, verses 18 to 21. It says that, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not listen to his parents, the son should be taken to the elders at the gate of his town, and then the child would be stoned to death. The Spartans also killed infants after they were born if they didn't look right. On the second count, there is a big difference between a child in the womb and one out of the womb. Once a baby is out of the womb, the mother's health cannot be affected directly and physically by the child. Maybe mentally, dealing with a baby that is constantly crying and demanding can drive you nuts, but at that point she would have other options she didn't have when the child was inside her, like giving the child up for adoption. In the case of rape, one would have to ask why the child wasn't aborted before, when it was legal. Perhaps the mother was surprised to find out how much the child reminded her of her rapist and thus could not love it. Again, she still has the adoption option she didn't have when the child was in the womb, and she had to suffer more at the rapist's hands by giving birth. The only case that seems relevant is the infant that is deformed and mentally handicapped. They are hard to give up to adoption. Even here I can note that since we've developed tests for Down syndrome, that most Down syndrome fetuses are aborted when abortion is available, and that the incidence of Down syndrome has dropped by almost 50%. That suggests to me that almost 50% of parents who once gave birth to a Down syndrome child might have wished they could kill the child, but felt obligated by law not to, and let that desire for the child's death be forever unspoken, perhaps even denied to themselves, because of how it might affect the child should they learn of it. This is a very sad fact of life, but it does suggest that the desire is there. In spite of the child's dependence on a caretaker, that now doesn't have to be the mother. The child is physically outside the body of its mother and she no longer has her body, her physical health, as an excuse. When the woman's body is no longer at stake, the child suddenly becomes protected by laws. Geerup's argument hinges on trying to claim that science and DNA have something important to say about our humanity. He is right, they do. Unfortunately, Geerup doesn't seem to know much about either DNA or science. DNA is full of clues to the fact that we have evolved. For example, scientists resurrected an ancient virus back in 2006 that is found in everyone's DNA. They recreated a 5-million-year-old virus whose remains are now found littered across everyone's genome. The virus is a retrovirus. It can insert copies of its genetic material into our own DNA. When such a virus infects the DNA of an animal, it can fail to replicate and the DNA becomes part of that animal's DNA. When the eggs and sperm of our primate ancestors got infected many millions of years ago, they pasted numerous copies of their genetic material into the primate's genome and that DNA became part of our human genome. The relics of these copies in human DNA are called human endogenous retroviruses, or HERVs. They make up about 1 to 8% of our genetic code. But they have accumulated mutations and most no longer function. These scientists found one that could still become an infectious virus and they brought it back to life. They called it Phoenix. See the side there for a link to an article on it. Such viral fragments are fossils that reside within each of us, carrying a record that goes back millions of years. Because the virus DNA no longer causes harm and seems to serve no purpose, they are said to be part of our junk DNA. It turns out monkeys have some of the same viral fossils in their DNA, but they have different mutations, deletions, and insertions, rendering them incapable of being a virus but also providing for a way to construct primate phylogenies from the ancient viral sequences found in our DNA. The genomes of modern humans and other apes are peppered with thousands of viral codes, and these are useful as phylogenetic markers. By comparing the viral DNA of two independently evolving species, we can estimate when the two species diverged. It is one example of species phylogeny based on molecular evolution. How can a creationist possibly explain these viral fossils in our DNA?